Darling, we've had one hell of a time, but the question on everybody's mind, where is the power? We've had one hell of a time, but the question on everybody's mind.
Griffin, you should introduce the show, and I'll say why Griffin should introduce the show, because Ethan, when you introduce the show, you're always at a very professional level.
Thank you.
It's like a solid B. Griffin sometimes brings a real A game energy that is energetic, and sometimes he acts like he doesn't know he's on a show and is totally confused and frightened by
it's a coin toss.
And I love the unpredictability of that. And for the live show that's already started with us having a weird fucking programming loop, I think it's perfect.
Let's see what it's going to be, folks.
What's he
Drum roll.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Ideas Don't Bleed.
Fucking not good.
That's a bad one.
It's good. It's good. We're doing good. This is Ideas Don't Bleed live.
I was going to continue doing it.
It doesn't matter.
Go ahead. Take the reins.
Take
the reins. Fine.
There's a special live stream. We are joined today by my good friend and wonderful writer, Mr. Kyle Higgins. Kyle, thank you for joining us today.
How's it going,
Hey,
guys?
Kyle.
Good to see you.
Before the show, Ethan asked me if you and me were friends, Kyle. He was like, "Are you guys friends?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I was like,
because sometimes Matt brings enemies on.
and then I was like, "Yeah, we're friends." And then I was like, "We've had meals together." And then I was like, "I don't actually know if we've ever had a meal together."
No, we did. We did. It's when I learned about your chocolate milk sitch.
Okay.
Go on.
And your straight edge.
Yeah.
It was a whole. We had. Do you remember? It was in. I think it was in Emerald City, and we went to that like late night Korean barbecue. Batman dinner when all the writers were still getting along.
Yeah. I was like the only non-DC writer there, and it was.
But even before that, we had. That's what it was. Before that, you and me and Donnie and a few others were having. We had dinner, like, in an area of Seattle, which now, by the way, I was there a few months ago, and like I didn't realize heroin was just so easily right there.
Seattle is wild these days. Seattle is like, if you want to see people put things into their body that they shouldn't, they'll just do it right there in front of you on the street.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's a bummer.
we have that in LA, but they're more boutiques than
Heroin boutique.
No. I'm saying people putting things into their bodies that there are so many elixirs and.
You're talking about crystals.
I am talking about crystals. Yeah,
That's fair.
Grinding up crystals and.
but yeah, so we did have a meal together. But
At least one.
yeah.
Basically, you're my best friend. Okay, got it.
Sure. I haven't seen you in a couple years. You refuse to do. Are you retired from conventions?
No, I'm not retired. There's a pandemic on, Kyle.
I'm just asking.
No, I haven't done.
Word
done
on
any
the street, you know.
There's no word on the street that I'm retired.
How would you know? You're not out there.
That's true. I'm not on the street. I have no idea what the word on the street is. But I'm not retired from conventions. I just haven't done any. I haven't seen you. But you know, I live in a city. You could come here and hang out with me.
Where are you at?
I live in New York City.
New York?
Called.
Yeah, I've been there.
New York City. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. You've heard of it. It's on the map. If you ask Ethan and Griffin where they're from, they'll make up a place.
That's not
true.
Every time I ask them where they live, it's a different.
You just don't remember. You're not retaining information about us because it doesn't matter.
Ethan looks like he needs to be rescued wherever he is right now. That like you need a plant, bro, like or something.
Yeah. It's my bedroom. I think that's generally the vibe of my bedroom.
You have two doors behind you. One leads to safety, and one leads to the decapitator. And
one's a gateway to hell.
Or his closet. Or his closet.
He
could have clothes. He could have.
It's funny. It's funny you say that because you've said that about here. I have another recording spot, and I think the last time we were there, Matt said that I looked like I was recording in a boiler room. So my house is taking a lot of flack. It's brutal.
Look at Matt Rosenberg's background. Now that is the background of a man who wants people to think he's a writer.
Yeah,
it's true.
And it's stressful. It's really stressful to look at.
It's called cosplay, and it's important to me.
Your hat is like you are perfectly accent colored out from your background. It's delightful.
Thank you.
I think it's great.
If we're going to talk about backgrounds, let's talk about that nice Nightwing poster you got going
That is
on.
a nice Nightwing poster. Yeah.
We're going to talk about Nightwing.
So
on here.
actually, there's a funny little story about that Nightwing poster.
Let's do it.
So Nightwing is my all-time favorite character. Since I was like 10 years old and realized that Nightwing existed, was a thing. And it was also the first book that I read and bought every month. You know, they don't understand, Matt, what it was like before you discovered a comic book store. It was like, it was the spinner rack at the grocery store in our generation, or not even a spinner rack, just like they had sometimes spinner rack. But so you were getting books like, and especially that era, it was like part one, like there were 4 Spider-Man titles, and part 1 would be in one title, and part 2 of a story would be in another title, and part 3 would be in another, like web of sensationalized like 1/2 issue. And so you couldn't follow anything. But I picked up Nightwing like 16, and it was like a low enough number where it was like, oh, I could actually keep going with this. And I already really liked the character and had kind of discovered them. That's why I picked up the issue. And the color scheme was like really, really striking to me. And so when I got hired to do Nightwing for the New 52, I actually went on eBay and found that poster, which was, and it pops up every once in a while, but I haven't really seen it in the years since. And this was back in 2011 now. And it was the promo poster that went out to stores in the for the launch of the Chuck Dixon Scott McDaniel series, which was the only other Nightwing #1 before my Nightwing #1. And so I actually knew Scott when I was much younger, and Chuck I'd met at conventions when I was, you know, growing up as well. And they were always so supportive. So I reached out to both of them and asked if they'd sign it for me. And so they both have signed it. One was like, "Welcome to Bloodhaven," and the other is "From one wingnut to another." So it's a little faded back there now, but I always thought that was a lot of fun. So
that's good. That was a really good a Nightwing story.
That was a good question that, you know, teed me up to, you know, your producers did a really good job with the pre-interview, man.
Yeah, they were like, "Hey, do you have a
This is all
poster on your wall?"
scripted.
I don't know if they're associated with this podcast or anything, but whoever called me and
Said, "What's on your wall?"
and asked me for personal information and stories that, now that I think about it, they would have been incriminating. But
Yeah, we're gonna get to all of that stuff. We're gonna get to all the legal stuff.
I probably should have checked the number with you before I just told a stranger everything about my life.
That's fine. That's fine. We're gonna act responsibly with all this information.
Sure.
It was Chip. Chip does that from time to time. All right.
Yeah.
He somehow finds out about the guests we're getting on the show, and then he'll go ahead and he'll do those sorts of
But the thing
shenanigans.
is, what the best part about when Chip does it is that he has to, he's an outside in actor, so he dresses up like Matt before he makes those phone calls.
Yeah.
Despite
And,
that,
know,
it's just audio. You can't see him.
You've seen Buffalo Bill, right? Like it's
He's-
Chip doing a Matt voice.
He's very method. It's it's unnerving, but it's beautiful. I think there's a lot of beauty in what he does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't say that about Chip a lot, but there's a lot of beauty in when he's pretending to be me and just getting people's social security numbers.
Chip's turn as Matthew Rosenberg, I think, is really like, I think this is the year he gets.
If there were an award for acting in life, that role.
If there were an award for being a grifter, it would be Chip would get it. He's so talented. But enough about Chip. Let's talk about you, Kyle.
Sure.
I like to do a little background. And actually, the thing that I'm intrigued about by you, which we've talked about in person, but I'm always sort of fascinated by and wanted to know more, and it was sort of the first thing I wanted to know, was like you got into comics in such a truly weird way, because like creating them, not as a fan, but like you got in through filmmaking. And I sort of, you know, I wanted you to tell that story, but also I was sort of wondering, like, is this where you want to be? Like you sort of fell backwards into this thing, and it's a
I don't know. I don't know if you've been seeing any of the stuff we're doing lately, but it does tend to get a little outside of the medium, doesn't it?
Sure. I mean, I'm just sort of fascinated by the like there are so many people who work so hard to get into comics? And obviously you're a lifelong comics fan, but you weren't working to get into comics, correct?
Well, no, but also to be fair, there was an opportunity, the window to an opportunity, it felt like that was opened, and I can tell the story in a second. And it was something that I looked at as like, well, there's no way I want to pass on that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I had tried to make comics in high school, like, and draw them as well for a period of time.
Can you draw at all? Like, are you okay?
Not really. I mean, I could do, I can do something if like if I like gun to my head, I can kind of get by with something. Mm-hmm. But I can definitely capture more gestural than I have no talent for I have no talent for rendering, mm-hmm. you know, or how to really depict it's but I was always really, like, growing up, I copied a lot of things all the time, like other drawings. Like, I was really good at that, and that's kind of how I got to understand a little bit of anatomy and then shot compositions and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I guess I had kind of dabbled in it, but you're right, it wasn't something that I was actively pursuing. Whether I want to be here or not, I do, of course.
That was a joke.
Well, it's a complicated answer in that my relationship with comics and storytelling in general in different mediums has changed over the years, and certainly since COVID started. And so now a lot of what I'm looking to do is actually kind of, I like to describe it as taking full advantage of a concept. And for me, a lot of the fun comes from playing with form and medium. Mm-hmm. And that's also allowed me to utilize some of these other kind of skills I've had over the years and have been developing in the background and really trying to get back towards when it comes to things like directing. And, you know, most people don't know, like, I was a sound editor for 10 years and worked in post for a long time. And, you know, also have this directing background and a little bit of graphic design and things like that. But as far as how I got into basically making comics, it was because of a film I directed in college. So it was a little superhero noir about the 1960s superhero labor union of Chicago. It's called Cowl, or no, actually it was called The League then. That's the name of the short. And it's, you know, we shot entirely on Super 16 millimeter film. I had this kind of, especially then, I was very kind of knowledgeable in post and post-production workflows in an era, like, we're talking 2006, 2007, when it was very complicated and a little dicey sometimes whether you're going to get a good image out if you didn't have, like, truly knowledgeable pros working on your stuff. And when you're in film school, you know, we had the building at Chapman University had opened only a year earlier, this particular expansion building. And it was like beyond cutting edge. And we had our own Spirit 4K film scanner and different data cine setup and we could do all this awesome color grade stuff and offline and online editing with like an Avid Unity server and stuff like that. But you're matching back to film, but having to edit video, but it has to still match back to the key code on the film. So it was very complicated to do stuff like this. But I had enough background in VFX work that I knew kind of what we were going to be able to pull off, and we designed the film just beyond the scope of what we thought we'd be able to do, and which was already ambitious. And then it almost killed us doing it. But when I finally finished it, and I had graduated at this point and then spent another 6 months on it, a good friend of mine, I haven't talked to him in several years now, but at that time became a good friend. Eric White had designed all the characters and reached out to me after, you know, he saw how it all turned out. And Eric was a comic book illustrator and a cartoonist himself. And he just really, really liked how the short turned out. And he's like, "Do you have an agent?" And I was like, I'm 23, man. I just graduated like last month. No, I don't have an agent. And so he offered to introduce me to his. And then one step further, he was like, "If you can get down to San Diego," and I was in Orange County. He's like, "If you can get down to San Diego, I've got my wife's Comic-Con badge. So like come down and like I want to introduce you to some people, like bring copies of the movie. So I burned all these DVDs, and the cover was and this will all loop back probably at the end. The cover was very it was very striking. It was something I had definitely invested time and resources in, and a friend of mine, Owen Colgan, who's a big concept artist at EA Sports or EA Games, and then he was one of the early guys at Riot. He designed like the majority of their like biggest champions. Lucian is his design, stuff like that. So Owen painted this cover for us, and so the DVD and the design packaging that I mocked up for it and everything was very, very striking, and so that made a world of difference.
Yeah.
And so Eric would introduce me to people, and I give them this disc, and so I got back to LA, and suddenly I had like some meetings on an unfinished movie, and then when the movie was finished, Eric sent it out a link to our very polished looking website. And, the Vimeo film version of a Vimeo link that was embedded into the site. And it was all very clean. He sent it out to like 200 people, everyone he knew in film and TV and comics. And one of the first people that wrote back was Joe Quesada. And he said that he had watched it, and that my love of comics and filmmaking showed up in every frame. And if there's ever anything you do for me, to let him know. And I wrote back and I was like, well, I'm a big fan of your work. And I was, and said, if you're ever looking for any new writers, you should let me know, because again, looking at, well, this is something I wouldn't mind exploring, and I didn't think I'd have that kind of opportunity that quickly. And so then you blink and suddenly you've spent 12 years doing it full time.
That's I love that story because it's such a weird.
Oh, hold on. Let me add an addendum to that, because this is the important part. So Tom, that sounds like it's, and then you're writing at Marvel, right?
Sure.
That's not how that went. So like, that's the thing. I feel like on this podcast, this is probably a good place to like actually contextualize then what actually happens after that. Right. So like you get the opportunity, and Tom asked me what kind of characters I liked, and I told him, and I even pitched doing the League as a comic, and he's like, well, we don't do creator owned, so we couldn't, and it already exists now, so it'd be too complicated. And so he said, here's what I'm going to do. I find in these types of situations, it's best for you not to pitch to me as the editor in chief. Right. And I, looking at it now, like I totally get it. It makes total sense. At the time, I'm like, okay, so how does it? He's like, I'm going to send the movie to all of my senior editorial staff and see if anyone bites. And if they don't, then I'll circle back and we'll figure something out from there. And so I got an email from Tom Brevoort one day. I don't even know if he liked the movie. He's never actually said, but if you know Tom, like he's just very, to the point. And he offered me an opportunity to pitch. But the thing is, it wasn't with any specific parameters beyond like a single story, like a one shot. Let's start small. And so he's like, well, if it's a good story, we'll find a place for it. So I spent a year writing up. I pitched over 20 one-shot ideas, 20 fully like broken ideas for one-shots.
At once or over a year?
No, at least 20 over a year. So it would be every few months I'd send in a few more. And then it'd be like a week would go by, or a few weeks would go by. Because, you're at the end of the priority list for an editor. Yeah. And that's just the way it is. And so he would get back to me eventually and go like, okay, I like these. He's like, but I've shared them with those books editors. And then it's like, they don't know who I am. Yeah. Right. So then I kind of figured out a way to, he finally told me where he had some slots open that were more specific. Cause I started looking at what books I knew he was the editor on just by picking up books on the stands. And then when I was able to get more specific parameters out of the 25th pitch that I had, turned in, then I catered something. It was actually with Alec, who had written the League with me. And it became a Captain America Theater of War one shot. And it just so happened we pitched a World War II story as he needed a World War II story. And he had said he needed a World War II story, but it was just, it all kind of coalesced.
Yeah.
But then it was a year before my next book, which was an Avengers one-shot. Within that time, though, I was able to connect through our Captain America artist's agent with some other publishers as I was looking to try to do the League as a comic. And that also included an introduction to Mike Martz, who was running the Bat office.
Sure.
And so then you just kind of start trying to lay different, groundwork where you're able to. And it was, So it's definitely a longer form kind of.
Do you still have all those pitches? Like, are those saved in a file that you're like, these are good ideas? Like, have you revisited them and been like, there's something to this? Or?
No, there's one issue. There's one story that came really close to happening, and it was actually Brubaker that killed it. And then when I saw Ed, when I met him in person, because we knew each other over email because he was very supportive of the short film.
Mm-hmm.
But when we met in person for the first time, the first thing he said to me was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry I killed that story. It was great. Like, but I kind of wanted to rip it off, But no, I totally understand. Like, especially where that character was at that point in his run, he had, cool plans for him. But it's a pitch that I still really like. And when I did the Winter Soldier one-shot or miniseries with Rod Reese a few years ago, I did go back and look at it to see if there was a way I could use any of it and it didn't fit there, but it's something I would like to do one day. But yeah, beyond that, I haven't looked at any of the other ones.
Yeah. It's always funny to me because I feel like, especially when you're starting, like you said, like people don't necessarily understand that like a lot of what happens is editors ask you if you have ideas because they've already got all their bases covered, and you sort of have to give them something that they didn't know they needed. And it's sort of this weird thing, and you end up with a lot of people end up with this slush pile of unused stuff that like I'm always sort of fascinated by. And I went back and looked at some of my early stuff and was like, oh, none of this is publishable. Like, this is terrible. I'm so glad that it didn't go through. But it's always funny because like every once in a while you'll find the thing where you're like, this is really good. And I don't.
Yeah. And then there are things. I've been really fortunate in my career thus far in that pretty much everything that I've ever wanted to do and make, I've been able to make. Like, I don't have a lot of stuff that died that I was really invested in. The one that didn't go is something that very much has inspired something we're going to be announcing pretty soon. And
you want to announce it here live on YouTube for 22 people?
Get the scoop.
Here's what I will say. This is by far, without a doubt, the most ambitious thing I have ever tried, ever.
Awesome.
And I say that with including the fact that we just did a surprise 5.5-minute fully animated short film voiced by Will Friedle as an Easter egg in an issue of Radiant Black. Like, what the thing that's coming up is very, very ambitious. And but it originates from a project
that died
that I was going to do with Tim Sale. And it died at it died where it died well before Tim unfortunately passed away this year. Right. But we're going to dedicate the first issue of this new thing to Tim.
Well, that's beautiful.
Yeah, wow.
When can we expect to see whatever this mystery thing is?
A couple weeks.
Oh wow!
Oh shit! Okay.
Yeah.
So we really basically had you on the show just like too early.
2 weeks too early.
Yeah.
2 weeks too early. We fucked up.
I think it's something that when it. Do you know what it is, Matt? Did I tell you about it?
No, I don't know what it is.
Okay. When we announce it, if you do want to talk about it, I'll
a follow
potentially
up.
come. Maybe. Yeah, we'll see.
Maybe.
Okay.
You might be too big for us by then. That's
no.
fine.
I mean, I definitely am already, but
yeah, no. You're already slumming it here with us, and that's nice. Did you see how this podcast started? It was real rough. You shouldn't be on here. This is bad for you.
I'm just glad most everyone has headphones.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Oh no, Ethan hasn't. I thought I could only see one of Ethan's ears.
There you go.
He does one like he needs to have situational awareness because he's in a dungeon. So
Well, I'm always scared somebody's gonna sneak up behind me out of that gateway to hell.
yeah. You got to be careful about that. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Kyle.
Yeah.
I think you're sort of a fascinating person to me because.
Thank you. Love that.
Yeah, well, wait to hear why. It doesn't go good from here.
It never does.
No, I mean, I knew you from the New 52 stuff, and then we knew each other from around at shows.
Yeah.
And you were a very
From our single meal together.
From our single meal, we got to know each other. No, but we'd table next to each other, we'd hang out at the bar or whatever. And you were always this sort of I was just like, Kyle very much knows what he wants. You were a very focused, driven writer, and I always found it really interesting and inspiring that you were like, I want to do these things, I want to move here, I want to do these things. And it was really, I felt like a lot of times in my career, I was kind of just like, I don't know, man. If someone says something cool to me, offers me something cool, I'll do it. And you were like, no, I'm very, like I plan things, and I always thought it was very interesting, but I didn't sort of understand the scope of what you were doing. And then you went from being like, the Nightwing writer and doing a bunch of other stuff to Power Rangers. And I was like, okay. And you were like, well, I like Power Rangers. And I was like, cool. That's cool. Like, I didn't grow up as a Power Rangers person. So like, to me, it's, it doesn't have any emotional attachment. So I'm like, oh, yeah, it's a book. It's boom. It's cool. It's respectable, whatever. And then you parlayed that into all these different things. And you like embedded yourself in the Power Rangers community really well. And you were making films and you were orchestrating all this stuff. And then from there, like, it just exploded in all these different directions that I think is so like, there are not a lot of comic creators who I talk to where your name comes up, where people don't just be like, man, Kyle in the last few years has really become this, like, you're this industry. Like, you've become this like mogul in this fascinating way that like, I now can look back and see it. I can see when we were talking, you were still like a DC writer. I can see you being like, yeah, I have eyes for bigger things and all this stuff, but I didn't quite understand it at the time. And like, I guess my question is like, where you are now with what you're doing with like Radiant Black and the Massive Verse and all this stuff, like, how much of this is built off of experiences you had in the moment, and how much is like, oh, I always knew I was going to do this? Like, maybe not what the book was, but the bigger stuff. Like, how much of this is planned for you?
So, sorry, I have the most emotionally needy cat. I'm actually my desk is in standing mode to try to prevent that, and that doesn't seem to discourage him at all. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. It's very kind of you to even acknowledge. It's weird when you're kind of in it and just like, all I'm doing is these, I feel like most of my days are spent paying invoices these days. Invoices and Zooms and, awful podcasts that are actually delightful,
I don't know anything about that.
Well, I'll send you some recs.
Oh, thanks.
We're putting that on our fucking cover at the full quote. Actually delightful.
Actually delightful.
Yeah.
But no, I would say a lot of it is planned. Like, a lot of this has been planned for quite some time. But it's also, it's weird. It's, you hear that colloquialism about luck being opportunity meeting, what is it? Opportunity meening like readiness.
Preparedness,
mm-hmm. Yeah, preparedness. And there's certainly some truth to that. When I always had in my mind the idea of the type of, and I think you guys will understand this. I always had in my mind that the idea of the type of creator that I wanted to be, and in the types of spaces I wanted to be working in. Mm-hmm. And I had the beginnings of the types of stories I wanted to tell, at least. And I was fortunate in that the types of stories I wanted to tell tended to be more, psychological thriller or superhero like stuff. And, I ended up, at least at the New 52, I ended up in hindsight, it didn't feel like it at the time. In hindsight, I ended up in definitely one of the better groups to be in during that era, like by far, if not the best. Working closely with Snyder and navigating the politics and also editorial and above editorial and all of it. And no one coming from a bad place, but just there's a lot of competing interests and a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And there's just a lot to figure out as a young writer, and also trying to figure out how to be consistent. But the longer I've done it and worked in comics, the clearer what those things and what those stories and types of in different medium swings and where my priorities, where I want them to be at, the more that has become kind of clearer. Like I'm able to not only see it clearer, but I can articulate it now. And part of it has always been about, like, for example, like starting a company that's more of a creative collective comes out of a place of wanting to work with my friends, because that's what I love. Like I say this, like, and it's true. The best part of comics is the collaboration. My favorite part is collaborating with my friends. I have no life. Like, this is just what I do. I work with artists and creators kind of around the world now. So I'm answering. There is always somebody up with a question. Like, it doesn't matter what time of day. Yeah. And so there's always things to do. And I embrace that in this era of my life. Like, that's what this era is for me. I'm in the, like, hunker down in my, my little apartment in LA with my very needy and emotionally complicated cat. And I'm just making stuff. We're just building universes and things like that. But for that to be possible, the truth of the matter is, you need the kind of right platform opportunity to kind of do it from. And, Todd McFarlane has given a lot of interviews over the years. There's a really great one he gave with Complex a few years ago, where he went through, it's like a 45-minute video, and every comic creator should look at it because it goes through how he built the foundations of what has become his empire, right? And the core foundational piece is Spawn. Yeah. But Spawn is built off of Todd's work on Spider-Man. And that work on Spider-Man being so defining that he really, it was an era where you could be kind of, I don't use the term brand in a negative light when I say brand here, but like Todd's art and the way he approached comics and the types of characters that you could tell the ones he loved to draw, right? Those are the ones he then basically you focus on and you build out your Spawn, and you're trying to bring readers as well as just people with any sort of general awareness of comics to follow you to the thing that you own, etc. Now, the reason the video is so fascinating is because those opportunities, when it comes to, say, Marvel and DC, which for a long time were where that's the best spot to build out something that you could then kind of, go and do your own thing off of and springboard. But for whatever reason, to me anyway, and I might be totally off base here, it has felt for some time, definitely for the last 5 or 6 years, like that's really tricky to do with these characters. And I think in part it's because runs have been shorter and there's been so much rebooting, and certainly the New 52 kind of broke things. And then there was reboots after that. And now it's all kind of, it's just a little different. And so with the exception of like, Matt and David Aja's Hawkeye, and I would actually point to Hawkeye and then Matt jumping and doing Sex Criminals with Chip is actually a platform jump there because it's the same, it's the tone, it's the voice. You're coming for this voice, right? And so this is all a long-winded way of saying that when I was doing kind of the DC stuff, I was watching the way Scott put rooms together and how he kind of navigated as well. Like, okay, I'm doing detective and now they've put me on Batman at Batman #1. Well, where do I go from here? And to me, it was like, oh, wait, what do you mean? Where do you go from here? he's like, well, you have to think about that. And it hadn't really occurred to me. But then you look at it and it's like, oh yeah, when you're out writing the main Batman book, where do you go? You go to Superman,
right.
or you go to Wonder Woman, you go to Justice League, and that's kind of it, you know. Or then you go to a B kind of list character and reinvent them and hopefully get them to pop. Obviously, Jeff did that for a lot of years as well.
Sure.
But it's kind of a path if you're even fortunate enough to get on, you know, the right one of those paths where the roller coaster is actually works, you know, where it's going up as opposed to stalling out, which is what often happens when you get on some of these books.
Do you feel like Nightwing's part of that path for you?
Yes, in some ways, yeah. And Nightwing's what helped me do Cowl. And you know, I have a complicated relationship with my time on Nightwing and with the book. Because it wasn't a great experience, but also it's an experience that I became a much, much better writer as a result of. And like, I like to look at it now as though, you know, some of the work I don't, you know, I'm not in love with.
Sure.
But it's cool that I got to have that type of relationship with my favorite character where I became a better writer, you know, from working on him.
Absolutely.
And so, that's helped. But the cool thing was that I think it was a book that did well within the New 52 and was selling well. And it's also kind of the book that I was able to then meet Eric Stevenson at Image because of. And so I started developing a relationship with Eric and Image, and we did Cowl, which was the beginning. And now Cowl is a part of the Massiveverse these years later. But we did Cowl as my first creator-owned book at Image. It's funny you bring up Power Rangers because to make a longer story, hopefully not too much longer, but really to bring it back home, the whole time I was doing New 52 stuff, I was doing comic book conventions as well. And this was an era where there was this little group of us in LA that tended to just end up at the same kind of launch day signings or local regional shows. So it was me, it was Brian Buccellato, Josh Fialkoff, Sterling Gates, Eric Wallace was in there, JT Kroll, certain times those guys were around. And the thing that was striking to me was like doing conventions on a regular basis now as like a pro and just meeting different fans and readers. I was really surprised by how prevalent Power Rangers was amongst convention goers. And so I actually brought up to Boom to Bryce Carlson, who I'd gone to college with, coincidentally, while I was doing Nightwing. I was like, you know what you guys should do? Like, you guys should get the license for Power Rangers one day. Like, you could build out, like, I kind of just saw it. It's like, you could build like a kind of Teen Titans or X-Men type superhero series, teenage superhero group book, and take full advantage of the concept and not be limited by pre-existing footage and kind of all that stuff. And Bryce, like, you know, it's funny you bring that up. He's like, we've been talking about that because the license is going to become available. And so then they didn't end up getting it. And so Paper Cuts announced that they were doing it. And so I kind of forgot about it after that. I was like, oh, I guess it didn't work out. And then fast forward a few more years, and because Paper Cuts didn't really do anything with it, they put out a few kind of like contained stories that were basically just episodes of the show that were designed to kind of be in that tone and everything. And suddenly Boom announces in this press release that they have the license, and they put out these covers that Goni Montes did of all the helmets. And they look like shiny, like brand new, like Ferraris, you know? And it was like that. They get it. That's what this book should be. And so I reached out and was like, I figured the book already had a creative team, and I was like, who do I have to kill to write a pitch for a backup? You know, and hopefully not you, Bryce, because you're the only one I know over there. And they didn't have a writer yet, but my name had come up because of Bryce is like, because we talked about it all those years ago. And so I had like a few weeks free in between going to make this little short film. And so I worked up a take on Power Rangers on how I would do it, got the gig. And then that became the thing that it's like those platform kind of properties or books, I should say, are hard to find. And there hadn't been anything like Power Rangers in comics, in superhero comics. And there hadn't been anything like superhero comics for Power Rangers. So that became the kind of, to me, you know, the platform that kind of made sense to tear out from, especially when Eric Stevenson asked me if I'd ever considered building an original superhero, because he thought there'd be a market for original superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that from like that minute, it was like, yeah, okay, I see it now. And then we actually waited on Radiant Black on announcing it and debuting it until after Ultraman came out, because in the same, you know, kind of tokusatsu adaptation space, or at least aesthetic influence, you can now, I was hoping it would create a pattern with retailers where it's like Power Rangers to Ultraman, to Radiant Black. And that fortunately is kind of what happened.
One of my questions here that you sort of answered was, you know, what's the deal with like ninja type dudes in motorcycle helmets? Like, why you like them so much? But,
you know what? I do have a good answer for that, because the other thing that Power Rangers really kind of changed for me as a writer, there were two gentlemen I met, Matt Groom and Michael DeSudel, both of whom are kind of integral pieces of the Massiverse here. Michael edits and does all the graphic design for all of our titles. He also builds our websites, and he's just, I mean, he's incredible. Matt is the creator of Infernal Girl Red, and, you know, wrote Supermassive with us and is doing the new Supermassive with us as well. And they ran a Power Ranger podcast. And so I met them when the book was first announced, and they had just reached out asking, or one of the readers tagged me on Twitter if I would do an interview. And to your point about the Power Ranger community, the fan community, like, I didn't know the community whatsoever. And I figured, well, I'm entering into something that I know has a very big community. And so you know, this might be a good way to try to figure out the lay of the land and just get a sense of things, because they were really, really nice, these two guys. And Michael's in the chat. And so after the first episode, I had this idea that I've kind of always, and this comes from my filmmaking kind of background, I love director's commentaries.
Sure.
Like in high school, I started animating trailers for Moonstone Books, like for their comics. And I would put on director's commentaries, because it's like 14-hour days in a chair doing all this in After Effects in like 2002, 2003. And so anyway, I got super into director commentaries as a young filmmaker, wannabe feature director. And so I was like, you know, I've always wanted to do one on a comic series that I'm writing where you do it monthly, where you do basically an episode for each issue. And so that's what we did for Power Rangers. And through kind of getting to know them and, you know, their help with things behind the scenes, you know, I think that not only was the material better on the book, but I discovered that I really work best with other people. Like, I work best as a writer when I'm able to talk through things and kind of kick the tires on things kind of more organically that way. And it also meant that I think some of their influence also rubbed off on me. And, you know, I became more comfortable with two things as a now, you know, getting a little older writer or creator: optimism and ambiguity. And those are not things that I used to be comfortable writing about. And Power Rangers really kind of changed that for me. And so the other thing that happened was Matt and Michael introduced me to where Power Rangers comes from, which I knew already, Super Sentai, and especially Mighty Morphin coming from Jew Ranger, the season Jew Ranger, but I had never watched any of the stuff. And as they started kind of showing me episodes, I kind of fell in love with this medium in a way, or sorry, not medium, this genre, called tokusatsu, which really just means special effects filming, but it's taken on, you know, the helmeted transforming hero is certainly, you know, an archetype of it. The kaiju Godzilla in this space as well. Well, I was totally burnt out on superheroes. Not only as a fan, but probably mostly I know this because of as a creator, when you're working on it every day and across all these genres, and then I'm just not into it anymore. And tokusatsu became this kind of thing that was exciting to explore and to just be a fan of again. And the conventions and different storytelling conventions are quite different, and it's just, you know, it's just different. And so that's really where it kind of comes from.
And so that's all stuff that you wanted to carry over into Radiant Black and sort of make your own. That's awesome.
I describe Radiant Black as Power Rangers with adult problems.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of part 1 of our discussion with Kyle Higgins. Make sure to check out Radiant Black as well as everything else Kyle is working on by giving him a follow on Twitter at Kyle D. Higgins and subscribing to his newsletter at kyledhiggins.substack.com. To get the latest episodes of this podcast, as well as news, giveaways, and even comics delivered straight to your inbox, go to ashcanpress.com and sign up for the newsletter. We'll be back next week for part 2 of our discussion, and in the meantime, you can write to us at ideasdon'tbleedpod@gmail.com or tweet to Matthew Rosenberg at Ashcan Press on Twitter, me at Tales to Astonish, or Griffin at Griff Sheridan. We'll include some of your correspondence on the show, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. And big thanks to Summer People for our theme song, Where's the Poison? Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Where is